Sometimes it's just one sentence, one single sentence delivered to Congress that can ignite a huge legal firestorm. That's exactly what happened when Pam Bondi testified. She made this really definitive claim. But now, a new legal analysis is raising some serious questions, suggesting that what she said wasn't just false. It might have actually been a federal crime. So let's dive into what was said and why this is such a big deal.
All right, so the whole controversy, it really just boils down to one single, really powerful sentence. We're talking about a super high-profile testimony where a very, very clear and unambiguous claim was made about the former president.
And here it is. This is the sentence. While testifying before the House Judiciary Committee, Pam Bondi stated, and I quote, "There is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime." Now, on the surface, that sounds like a straightforward statement of fact, right? But from a legal perspective, well, it's a whole different story.
But that statement immediately brings up a huge question, especially for legal analyst Glenn Kirshner. How does that no evidence claim stack up against what's in the recently released Epstein files? And folks, this is where the legal argument really gets interesting.
Okay, so to really get to the heart of this legal analysis, we have to talk about one specific word, evidence. What does it actually mean in a legal context? Because it's probably not what you think.
And this slide really lays out the core conflict. On one side, you've got Pam Bondi's very firm statement, no evidence. But on the other side, you have the legal analyst viewpoint, which is that an allegation is, in itself, a form of evidence. Two completely different interpretations. So according to this analysis, evidence is basically any information that's given to law enforcement that even suggests a potential crime happened. Here's the kicker. It doesn't need to be proven credible or corroborated at that stage. Just the allegation itself, sitting in a case file, that is considered evidence that has to be looked into. This is the key distinction, right here. See, if Bondi had said something like, "There's no credible evidence," that would be different. That would imply the allegations were investigated and, came up empty. But by just saying no evidence, full stop, she made a very black and white factual claim. And that's a claim that could be proven false simply by the existence of any allegation in a law enforcement file. Okay, so because of that very specific wording, this legal analysis argues that her testimony, plus some other actions related to these files, could actually open the door to investigations into two specific federal crimes. First up, making false statements to Congress. That's a violation of 18 U.S. Code Section 1001. And according to Kirshner's analysis, it doesn't even matter if you're under oath. Lying to Congress is a potential felony. We're talking a 5-year statute of limitations and a possible penalty of up to 5 years in prison for each false statement. All right, the second potential crime that this analysis brings up is being an accessory after the fact. Legally, it's pretty simple. It just boils down to two things. One, you have to know that a federal crime happened. And two, you have to do something to help the person who did it get away with it. Help them avoid getting caught or punished. And this is where the Epstein files come back into play. The analysis suggests that if someone is improperly redacting or blacking out names from those documents, well, that could be seen as a deliberate act to help potential criminals avoid accountability. And that right there fits the legal definition of being an accessory after the fact. So all of this, it leads to a much, much bigger question, one that's really at the core of this analysis. Is the American justice system actually capable of holding the most powerful people in the country accountable for their actions? Well, according to Kirshner's analysis, the answer is yes, it is capable. He actually points to some prior cases as proof. For example, with the classified documents case, the argument is that an appeal against the judge probably would have worked. And in the January 6 case, even with the Supreme Court's ruling on immunity, that only protected official acts. It left the door wide open for prosecuting any private acts done as a candidate. So the big takeaway here from this perspective is that the judicial system itself wasn't broken. The argument is that the wheels of justice were turning. They were in the process of holding Donald Trump accountable. But that whole process was stopped dead in its tracks by a political event, him winning the presidency. And that brings us to the final piece of this analysis, which takes a step back and looks at the bigger picture, comparing what's happening in the U.S. to how other big democracies handle holding their leaders accountable. The analysis points to places like Brazil, South Korea, and France. And in all of these countries, you see former presidents and other powerful leaders actually being prosecuted, and in some cases, even sent to prison.
They're held up as examples of places where the rule of law seems to apply to everyone, no matter how powerful you are.
And this all leads to a pretty stark conclusion from the analyst Glenn Kirshner. He says, and I'm quoting here, "We have fallen beneath the expectation of a civilized country. We are going to need to restore the public's faith in our ability to treat everybody equally under the law." Pretty strong words. And so, at the end of the day, this whole analysis really boils down to one massive fundamental question. Is the rule of law really being applied equally to everyone in America? And that's the tough question at the very heart of this entire debate.